Good afternoon, everyone. We'll let you come on in and take your seats and get ready. This should be a wonderful afternoon. This program is 90 years in the making, which is kind of fun. As a historian, I enjoy things at least that old, so it should be perfect. But my name is Sarah Hansen, and I am with the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society, and we are here to help along gather some of the artifacts and things in the back and arrange the display. Many of you I know are parishioners at St. Mary's and have been hearing history stories all weekend, if not all year, as we celebrate the 135th anniversary of the parish itself, and then the 90th anniversary of the building we are in now. It's my great pleasure when we started talking about this building in particular and knowing the connection to the Hill family, James and Mary Hill, it was my great pleasure to immediately pick up the phone and call Eileen McCormick, our speaker today, who is the former curator of the Hill family papers when they were held at the Hill Reference Library. And ultimately, those papers have been transferred to the Minnesota Historical Society for all of us to be able to enjoy and go through. But all of that organizing of them and putting them in order was done by Eileen over a series of years. So she is hands down the expert and the one you want to hear from about this. So I will turn it over and welcome Eileen McCormick this afternoon.
Are you able to hear me first? No? Now? Better? Maybe if people are way in the back, if they moved up, if they can't hear. I'm not quite 90 years old, like the church, but I'm honing in on that. So what I'm going to talk about today is mainly Mary Hill, Mrs. James Hill, and her daughter's contributions to St. Mary's in White Bear Lake, but also how they became connected with White Bear. Certainly, North Oaks is the main connection. I'm not going to talk about James Hill at all because you all know everything there is to know about James Hill. But I am going to talk about Mary a little bit when we start out here. They've got me all fitted up with technology, so if things don't go smoothly, ignore it. Mary Hill, Mary Mahegan Hill, liked to think of herself as an old settler in St. Paul, which in fact she was. Mary arrived with her family, her mother and her father and her sister, in 1850. So that was 1 year after Minnesota Territory was carved out and 8 years before statehood. So she really was an early settler. And every year on the anniversary of the May Day that Mary arrived in St. Paul, she would have a new doormat put out. And she'd write in her diary that she was having that done. When the Mahegans came, they lived right on Bench Street. And Bench Street now is almost non-existent, although there is a sign. But it's 1 block toward the river from Kellogg Boulevard. So they lived on the same square block that the log cathedral was built. A year after they arrived, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet came up from St. Louis and started a school, St. Joseph's Academy, on this same block. And Mary was one of the first pupils at St. Joseph's. I also have a pointer that I can use. This, right around here was the academy. And I don't know if those two X's are where the house was. It would have, look, this is not their house, but this is how the area looked 8 years later, 8 years after the Mohegans arrived. You can see the bluff in the front. When Mary was a young girl, Father Louis Caillet was her, I would say, her spiritual father, and in many ways, since her own father had died when she was 8 years old, he kind of became her, now we would say her mentor, but he helped Mary, and Mary was very religious. And I say that now, but most of you here, if you picture your grandmother or your great aunt or maybe your mother, you know that in their lives, the church was an integral part. You know, they didn't miss Mass on Sunday or a holy day. The sacraments were very important. Mary, throughout her life, the church was one of the most important things to her. Her young life after her father died was quite traumatic. Her mother remarried immediately. The man she married was named Patrick Mulligan. So actually, Mary's mother became Mary McGowan Mohegan Mulligan. She was Irish, by the way, in case you didn't get that. But they were poor. Patrick was in and out of the city directories, so I'm kind of assuming he might have been in and out of their lives. When she was 16, she started working at the Merchant's Hotel. She was a waitress. And her life changed because James Hill, and this is James Hill, by the way, not the old bearded thing. James Hill worked on the levee right down from the Merchant's Hotel, and he would take his lunch at the Merchant's Hotel. And he kind of fell for Mary Mohegan. Mary was very pretty. Mary and James Hill became engaged in 1864. Mary was almost 18. James Hill was almost 26. Father Caillet and James Hill and Mary all decided she needed additional schooling. So for 3 years, Mary Hill attended St. Mary's Institute in Milwaukee. It was a school run by the School Sisters of Notre Dame. She never came home for those 3 years of their engagement. Fortunately, James Hill's business often took him to Chicago, and Milwaukee is fairly close to Chicago. So they did get together on occasion. When she returned in 1867, they were married. James Hill was not Catholic, so they were married in the parlor of Father Caillet's residence at St. Mary's Church in Lowertown. This is the Hill House in Lowertown. It's their third home. They moved into a cottage in Lowertown right after their marriage. They lived in Lowertown until 1891, so 24 years. All of their children were born in Lowertown. Do you want to see their children? That's Mamie. Mamie was born in 1868. Then we'll quickly go through the rest. James Norman, Louis, Clara, Katie. Katie is actually the only one of the Hill children who died in infancy. All the rest of them lived to adulthood. Charlotte, Ruth, Rachel, Gertrude, and lastly, Walter. Walter was born in 1885. So from 1968 to 85, Mary had 10 children. This will look familiar to many of you. This is actually not your church, but St. Mary's in Lowertown. The church opened in 1867. It was on 9th and Locust. Locust is kind of around the Lafayette Park area is that on Dayton's Bluff? No. East. West. West of Dayton's Bluff, east of downtown, okay? It's not there anymore, so it doesn't really make any difference, but Mary Hill was very involved in the church. Father Caillet was the pastor, and many of her neighbors in Lowertown were part of the Rosary Society, the Women's Sodality. They also got together and had the school built, a home for working women, and if the working women had children, there were daycare facilities, and this is all late, most likely from the mid-1870s to the turn of the century. When they moved to Summit Avenue in 1891, the Hill children, all of whom had been baptized, received their first communion, been confirmed at St. Mary's. Mary and the children, JJHill was not a churchgoer, but Mary was. So Mary and the children remained part of the St. Mary's congregation. Even when the cathedral was built right down the street, they still went to St. Mary's. Only 2 of their daughters were married at St. Mary's. Mamie, the oldest, was married there in 1888, and Gertrude, the youngest daughter, was married there in 1906. The other Hill daughters were married at the house. Archbishop Eileen came and they were married in the parlor. This is the invitation to Gertrude's wedding. The reception was at the Hill house, and this is a photograph of all the Hill family members are in this, except JJHill. And maybe that's why Gertrude looks a little disconcerted, I don't know, but James didn't get into the picture. Now we're going backwards. In 1883, JJHill purchased over 3,000 acres from Charles Gilfillan in what is now North Oaks. It became an experimental farm and also the family's country home. It was Mary Hill's favorite home. Of all the homes they had in St. Paul or Jekyll Island, New York City, fishing lodge in Quebec, apartment in Paris, North Oaks was where she most wanted to be. She would come in late May or early June every year and stay as long as she could. Usually it was sometime in September. They lived, these slides aren't great here, but this is the old Gilfillan house. And the family actually lived in that house until 1912. So it was a house that did not have central heating. So once winter came, they went, actually. This is a painting of the entire Hill family at their home at North Oaks. This was done in 1886. Oops, wait. Getting ahead of myself. I meant to do this. JJHill is up there reading the paper, and way down there is 1-year-old Walter. So this is the entire family. For Mary, North Oaks was just kind of a quick buggy ride to White Bear Lake. So she could attend Mass and visit with friends. Many St. Paul friends of Mary either had cottages in White Bear or would come for like summer getaways. White Bear Lake was kind of a resort area. In 1881, this is the first church that was built in White Bear. The parish was established in 1873, but the services were held either in a school or in the Marco Cottage until 1881 when this church was built. This is the same church, and I used my tremendous technical skills here. There are two descriptions of the enlarging of the church. One said it happened in 1883, and one said it happened, 1893, and one said 1897. But both of them said that they cut the church in half and spread it out so that it went from 60 feet to 80 feet. Well, I assumed that meant they did it this way. So I thought I was really being foxy doing this to it. But then I read that actually it was the long way that they did it, and not the side to side. But you get the idea, kind of. They didn't always go to White Bear Lake, the hills, by buggy, although that was the normal transportation. In Mary's diary, on October 7th, 1885, she writes, Father Caillet, who was staying with the family at North Oaks, Father Caillet, Mamie, and I walked to White Bear in an hour and 50 minutes. An hour and 50 minutes. In 1887, she says, Mamie went to White Bear on Saddle in the afternoon. And fortunately, I have a painting of Mamie on her way to White Bear. Do you all believe that? But that is Mamie, and she is in saddle. The Hill family grew up in White Bear, in North Oaks. They loved the area as much as their mother and father did. They had, as they grew to be teenagers and young people, they had friends staying and spent many summers there. This is a photo from around 1900, and it's on the porch at North Oaks, and you can see the women I'm going to be talking about mostly from now on, the ones that had a really strong connection with your church. Rachel, it's Rachel Hill Beckmann. In 1913, she married Egil Beckmann, or Egil Beckmann, who was a physician in St. Paul. Gertrude Hill Gavin, she married in 1906, and we saw her at her wedding. And Charlotte Hill Slade. Charlotte Slade died in 1923, but in her will, she left $25,000 to build St. Mary's Church here in White Bear Lake. The other, Rachel and Gertrude, were the other two daughters who contributed to the church here. Backing up again a little bit, this was the North Oaks home in 1912. James Hill died in 1916. In 1919, Mary Hill actually spent her last summer at North Oaks. She had a heart attack in the fall that year, and because of her fragile health, she was no longer able to come to North Oaks in 1920 or 1921. And she died in November of 1921. 1919 is an important date in Mary Hill's life and in the life of St. Mary's Parish here. Her diary mentions often during that summer of 1919 that Father Fahey came to visit. Father Fahey was the pastor here at St. Mary's. This is a photo of him in the old church, and this is him right there. In September of 1919, she writes, Father Fahey called, very happy today to see the prospect that his school debt will be paid. In October, so he was very happy that day. In October, she writes, Father Fahey called in the afternoon. He was very happy to get his school debt paid. And here he looks kind of very happy, actually. What's interesting, just a little sideline, in the booklet on the history of this parish that was done in 1981, it reads, contrary to public opinion, St. Mary's did not have an angel providing for the school. What do you think? I think they might have had an angel. And 7 years later, 3 of Mary Hill's daughters kind of took on the halo and provided a new church for St. Mary's. Oh, here's the school. And look at how tiny the church. That was kind of my first clue on those other pictures, because I thought, gee, if it's that narrow in 1914, maybe I had that wrong. This is just the receipt from the Mary Hill papers that Father Fahey had to sign for their records. 10,000. You can multiply that by about 18 to get, and that only gives you the dollar amount, not the purchasing. We're back to the girls. Just going to show you one more time that it's Rachel, Gertrude, and Charlotte's will that are responsible for the church. Rachel and Charlotte both had country homes in Delwood. So Rachel actually attended Mass here. Okay, here we are. The one stipulation that the 2 Hill daughters had on the building of a church here, and it was a big one, big stipulation. They wanted it to be built exactly like St. Mary's in Lowertown. It was the church they'd grown up with. Father Kaye, who was the old friend of the entire family, designed this church, and they wanted the church that they were paying for to look just like it. And this is your church. This is what it still looks like today on the exterior. Now, I thought this was a cool idea to show you how but they got so skinny that it's kind of hard to, but you can see that the number of windows in the entire church are exactly the same. The tower, the rose window above the front entrance, everything really is exactly the same. The same type of stone was used. Now, by the time this church was finished, Old St. Mary's had burned down. So in effect, what you had here was an exact copy, inside and out, of a church that was built in 1867. The plans that you may have seen in your area out there showed that the architects measured everything. They measured the woodwork, they measured the communion rail, they measured everything so that it could be that you can't see it all, but you can look out there and see it. This is a photograph of Old St. Mary's. If I was going to do a side-by-side of these, but I couldn't get it to work right, so. But all you have to do, I'm going to go back and forth for you, but if you look at, say, the area where the altar is, and that would be right down here, it's very similar. And the roof, the timbered roof, even the way the timbers brace down on the walls, it is very similar. Oops, wait. There. It's very similar. Even the communion rail, and believe me, they measured everything. The placement of doorways, the placement of windows. This is the back of Old St. Mary's. And this is the back of New St. Mary's. And here, I'm assuming there, that in this photo, obviously the organ pipes are taking up the entire choir loft. So I can't tell you if there are windows behind there, but I'm assuming there are. And this again is your church. Now, I'm just going to read you something, just in case you think that maybe those Hill daughters weren't concerned with how the church was built or what went into the church. Bear with me here. This was Gertrude Hill writing to Rachel from her home on Long Island, New York, in early 1926. First, she just writes about family stuff. Then she says, now, about the church. Have you had the pedestal made for the statue of the Madonna? I remember she turned out to be larger than she showed, and you spoke of having the pedestal lower. The one day I was in Paris, I found a statue of the same Madonna, but reduced in size. I cabled Mary Traylor, well, I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, for the exact size, as I found out that maybe it at a foot lower would be something we could use instead. If you've already gone ahead and got the pedestal, just forget it. We'll go with the one you have. Then she says, I found a very good crucifix, 17th century French. The cross is about 3 foot long, the figure carved in wood. Now, I don't know if you have that in one of your chapels or not. I think it would go on a wall. There is no such thing as a statue of our Lord older than 19th century, except on a crucifix or as a baby. Okay, then she goes on, we're done with the crucifix. There was no St. John the Baptist to be found in Europe, except one in the Cathedral at Siena by Donatello. That one is lovely, but I don't know how to get it reproduced. I saw 3 stations in a sort of pinkish, creamish stone. They are wonderful. They are satisfactory and very inexpensive. But there are only 3. I don't know if the artist is planning on making more. I'll find out. So I don't know if those are your stations or not. It's hard to tell, but let's see. There's a Norwegian Catholic sculptor in Rome who does religious subjects with very nice feeling. I don't know, but maybe he could make stations. I could ask him. I have his address. He made a beautiful St. Bridget of Sweden. What else did she talk about? Oh, will you ask Lund, the architect, to send me a blueprint of the main altar with the measurements of the shelf for the candelabra, which are out there now. Also the height of the tabernacle. Write the measures in centimeters. I ordered candlesticks and the crucifix, like the one and I can't read her writing. Okay, then we will need a scale drawing. I also ordered 2 lovely angels, copied after angels at Reims, France. They are plaster, but finished to look like pinkish stone. So I don't know if you had angels here either, but they're about 30 inches high and very cheap. So I don't know if you have them or don't have them. I thought they might look well in the little spaces where the architect thought of putting statues. One more thing. The bench, chair, prie-dieu are ready. I have to go and see them on Monday. Did you like the tabernacle door? That one, I couldn't see on any of these photos, but I'm sure. Did you like the tabernacle? It's in there, and you liked it? Well, Gertrude would be happy about it. I guess when is the church to be consecrated, or is it too early to know? The church was consecrated in November of that year. You have the plaque on your wall in Latin. In English, it says, "In memory of a beloved mother, Mary Teresa Hill, who departed this life on November 22nd, 1921. The church in the adjoining chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary, Mother of God, 3 of her daughters have humbly offered with the request that worshipers graciously remember in their holy prayers their mother and themselves." Now, I was expecting to come in here and see this plaque in English. It's in Latin, and it seems like there can't be that much there. So this is from that same 1981 history. So I don't know. I'm almost finished. This was Mary's birthday in 1914. She's holding Rachel Hill's oldest daughter, Mary, on her lap. And I've just showed you once again the people that were instrumental in helping to not only fund things here, but Hill family members who were part of your congregation. And you'll notice the young girl sitting to Mary's left, Georgiana Slade Rennie. She was Charlotte Hill's daughter. And in the 1881 history, it says, "As music became an integral part of Sunday worship, Father Byrne recognized the need for a first-class organ that could be installed in the choir loft. Again, the Hill family responded. Mrs. Georgiana Slade Rennie, daughter of James JJHill, donated the Mueller organ in 1937. So Mary's granddaughter continued to, and she also lived in Delwood, so she continued to support the church. That's it. Are there any questions? Yes.
Do you know that the original St. Mary's in Lowertown, what was the nationality like? Most of the parishes in the east side of St. Paul, one was German, one was English, one was Irish, one was Polish. So was St. Mary's in Lowertown considered French or Irish?
It was considered the Irish church. Assumption was the German church. St. Louis was the French church, so it was considered the Irish church. But certainly there were other nationalities living in the Lowertown area. Now that whole area now is mostly freeways and things, but if you know where the Baptist church is on Wakuta, when you get off, James Hill lived on the block just east of that church. So there's just a little, the parking lot is where the Uphams lived, and then James Hill's house was next to there. Mm-hmm. Yes. Her funeral was held at the Cathedral. Yeah. Mary Hill, in her later life, after James Hill died, the Hill philanthropy, which was extensive in St. Paul, was finally in Mary's name. You know, before that, she was very influential in what was given, but it was always given in James Hill's name. Once it was in her name, she just narrowed it in, and she gave to St. Paul Catholic institutions, World War I war relief, and that was about it. I mean, those were the two things she was interested in. And her funeral was at the cathedral. She gave a lot of money to Catholic education. And then I think in 1957, 58, the Archdiocese opened a new boys' high school, and they named it in her memory. It was Hill High School, now it's Hill Murray. But so her giving in her own name was extensive for those 5 years. Well, I don't think so. No, Joe? No, Joe. What year would that have been? Rachel Hill died in 63 or 7. Anyways, that's when she died. And I don't know if Gertrude was Catholic. Did she come to church here, Joe? Not after it was remodeled. So, and I guess you can, they were buried. Okay, her daughter. Her sister. Yep, the baby. Yes.
We did have some rival of the Hill family and our church.
Rennie, okay. Oh, you did? Okay. Well, and she was the family historian.
I recall Father Finn always being before the Mass, saving a spot for her way
Oh.
out in the front pew.
Oh,
Yes,
how cool.
I recall all of that.
Oh, that's neat. Oh, okay.
I interviewed her in Delwood. Mrs.
At her home.
She was the wife of a professor in St. Thomas. And had a very fine interview with her. So she was a regular member here.
Well, you know, she actually had an office at the Hill Library, and she worked on her grandfather's history. You know, she was very interested in history and lived until she was born in '03, but lived in, I think, until the early 90s, the early 1990s. Oh, okay, yeah.
Now, is that property is the new
No, that was Rachel's, Rachel Beckmann, and then her daughter Gertrude married Peter Folliet. That's the wine. They were married here? Okay, okay. Yes. You know, I don't. A lot. I'm not. A lot times 15 to 18%. No, I'm sure that is somewhere, maybe in the church records, maybe at the Historical Society, your Historical Society. I don't know, but if if Gertrude's wandering around Europe picking up statues and crucifixes and everything had to be hand built because they wanted it exactly the same. So I can understand why Tootie didn't come here after it changed, because she would, you know, yeah, it was her mom Rachel was really the guiding force, because she was here, so. Yes?
What year did the original church burn down? And then when year did this one open up?
Okay.
Close in time?
It's close. The original church burned in 1930, but it had been used, because the whole area where the original church was in Lowertown just became railroads and the supporting industries that go along with railroads. They built a new church, actually right across from where where James and Mary Hill lived in Lowertown on West 7th, or is it East 7th then? Okay. I grew up in Minneapolis, so, and you know, in Minneapolis, it's north is north, and whereas,
St. Paul's
no, right. But anyway, in, I think 1924, they built a new church, and then in 1930, the old church burned down. But Rachel had an idea that they should build the replica in Lowertown rather, than here. And I don't know why that didn't happen. I think it might have had something to do with the commercialism and the railroads of that area. And then White Bear needed a new church, and she lived in Delwood, and so it kind of morphed into doing it here rather than there.
But I was referring to when the original St. Mary's Church was over where the school is now.
Oh, didn't they sell that? Oh, did that burn? I thought they sold it. No? They auctioned it off. Oh, okay. Oh, could be. Right. Okay. Oh. Yes. I don't know. There is a book on the history of the old St. Mary's Church in Lowertown, and in the back it has a list of pastors and assistant pastors, but I don't know that. Probably. Well, and she knew a lot of priests, It was a small community in those days, so. Okay. Oh. Well, where is the school? Oh, okay. Okay. So the old church was next to that school. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to expand the conversation to the extent that we're Mary Hanson. She's the secretary and executor of the White Bear Lake Historical Society. And for her grandpa, great-grandpa, who lived right there on Lake Avenue and Shady Lane, and there's pictures of that house. This house is still standing there.
Uh-huh.
And next to it, the house is still there, they had to collapse it. But next door to that house on the Shady Lane and Lake Avenue is where the first Mass was celebrated as far as summertime. This goes way back to the 1860s.
Mm-hmm.
And where I live,
Okay.
That's where the little kiddies would have Sunday school.
Oh, all right.
And that's on Lake Avenue and, we're on Lake Avenue.
Uh-huh.
Shady Lane is close by.
Well, and Sarah's, is it great-grandparents lived in Lowertown, didn't they, Sarah?
Great-great-grandparents.
The other ones, okay.
The
princes were in Lowertown.
At St. Mary's in order to go in that period.
Okay, okay.
So, and I will just say, I know Mary wants to do some announcements and things and wrap up the formal portion, but this is Bud Nakasone, who wrote the 1981 history.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much.
Well, first, we want to thank Eileen. This was fantastic. Then I wanted to point out that, see the upright wooden stands all around the church over here in the gathering space? They each have something interesting to tell you, so you can walk around to each of them. And also the blueprints are hanging on the wall in the St. Joseph room. And that leads me to say that we have hospitality in the St. Joseph room, where we have delicious treats from Pine Tree Apple Orchard and some coffee. And so you're all invited to the St. Joseph room and to wander around the church. Thank you.